G'day guys, and in this video I'm going to talk about the tools and steel you can use to get started in blacksmithing. So, to preface this, the best tool is the one you have. But if you're getting started in blacksmithing, or you're looking at getting started in blacksmithing and want some information on the basic tools that you need to start out, the very first tools you need, I'm going to give you a bit of a rundown on what I started out with and what could be used to start out with as well. Now, you can see a little bit of an array of the tools that I've got on my anvil in front of me. Now, this is not all required tooling, but it's stuff that can really help. Now, obviously, the anvil isn't included. Now, when you're getting started in blacksmithing, one of the first things you want to do is get out and buy an anvil. And I can recommend to you, don't. Because A, you don't know if you're going to stick with blacksmithing very long, and anvils are incredibly expensive. And B, you don't really need an anvil to get started in blacksmithing. Any large chunk of steel will do. You can look up videos on YouTube of guys using 7-pound sledgehammer heads as anvils, just sunk into a stump. Or a small piece of railroad track. I have some in the back there. A large piece of steel bolted or mounted somehow to a large piece of material such as a stump or a piece of concrete or a rock will do as an anvil in the beginning. You don't need a proper London pattern anvil like this one, because these can get very expensive very quickly. Now, that being said, if you have access to an anvil, obviously you can use it. But if you don't have one, don't think that you can't blacksmith, because the limitation is only in your mind. Now, the first thing you can think about is hammers. Now, I don't like using short club hammers like this, but a lot of your local hardware stores will have club hammers like this, or wrecking hammers, stuff that's known as wrecking hammers and stuff like that, for relatively cheap. If you're in the US, you can probably go to Ace Hardware or Lowe's, and you'll find a similar hammer to this, hopefully with a bit of a longer handle, for relatively cheap. I think I paid 20 bucks for this little hammer when I first started out, and this is one of the first hammers that I started using to forge. And it works. It is good enough for the task, and you can get them better as you go along, but when you start out with a decent hammer, you can get going really fast. So find yourself a relatively cheap, a lot of the time you can find just the heads at a Records or a garage sale or a swap meet. You'll find heads without handles, and you can always go and make yourself a handle and have a decent hammer to use. So, hammer's definitely important as a blacksmith. The next most important tool that people tend to overlook is an ability to clamp things. Now, obviously, you can have a vise like I have, and you've seen it in many of my videos. I have a rather large vise, and that's a really nice thing to have. But say you don't have the room for a vise, or you don't have a bench that you can permanently mount something to. Clamps are incredibly important. Now, you can get the super expensive F clamps that you get for carpentry and stuff like that. These are incredibly useful, but they're also more expensive. Sometimes you'll find them at swap meets, stuff like that, but I use these every day, and not just for clamping things to a tabletop to file on it, or clamping, my sanding jig to my table to sand things. I'm also using it to, clamp, when I'm clamping the ends of my blades to glue the handles on, stuff like that. Clamps are really useful, but you don't just have to go for the big steel F clamps. You can use stuff like these Irwin Quick Grips. Now, I'm not sponsored by Irwin, but these quick grip clamps, the ones with the triggers kind of like a glue gun, are incredibly useful because they're very fast to use, and you can use them for exactly the same purpose. They're not as strong, but they will clamp things down for you to work on them, especially if you wanted to do file work and stuff like that. I had a friend of mine who lived on the second story of an apartment building, and he used to clamp things with using these to his banister, the railing, outside his apartment, and file on things out there. So again, the only limitation is how you work out how you can do the things you want to do. So, clamps, also incredibly important. The third tool is something to hold things with. Now, when you're getting started in forging, I'm going to tell you about how to get started in forging without needing tongs, and making tongs without tongs. But pliers, almost everyone has. Tongue and groove grips are incredibly useful because they're a little bit longer, they've got a little bit more grip. Vice grips are also incredibly useful. I don't actually have a set, I don't use them, but they are also incredibly useful for this. And small pliers. Now these wouldn't be good for holding when forging, but they are good for, manipulating things, twisting little bits and stuff like that. The tongue and groove grips can hold quite large stock fairly securely, although you have to get your hand fairly close to the fire to pull it out. So I would recommend gloves if you're going to use these. But you don't have to start with pliers, but again, if that's all you have, use it. And last but not least, on the list of tools that I would recommend is files. Now, as a blacksmith, you don't necessarily need to remove a lot of stock, but sometimes you're going to need to. And I know that some people that are watching can't get access to angle grinders, to power grinders like my Fire Ant, or even to a bench grinder. They can't get access to it, they can't use it in the facility that they're using. Say you're living in an apartment building or a small suburban complex. You can't use the heavy power tools because it creates too much noise, too much dust, all that kind of stuff. Files are your best friend. Now, you don't have to go out and buy super expensive files. I have this set of Barco files, which are quite a good set of files. They're quite expensive. And the more expensive something is, normally the better it is. Normally you get what you pay for in tools. Now, you might not be able to afford those, but there are relatively decent quality files and stuff like that out there for really cheap. I actually bought a set of files recently from Red Dot, which is our version of like a $2 store. I think it was $10 for a set of 4 files, and they actually work pretty well. So you don't have to break the bank to buy a good set of files, but having usable files is really important because being able to remove material is always important in a blacksmith shop. And together with the clamps, you can remove quite a bit of material, make bevels on blades, all that kind of stuff in a relatively small workshop with very, very little tooling. And if you're going to use files, get a file card. File cards aren't that expensive, and they're not that hard to find. Most places that sell files also sell file cards, and basically all it is a very fine-toothed steel wire brush, but it's for cleaning file teeth, and this will increase the longevity of your files by light years. So make sure if you're going to be using files, get a file card because these things are indispensable. The other thing you can think about is if you're going to swap meets and you're going to garage sales and stuff like that, is look out for old files. Now this is the start of the materials portion of this video. Files are decent steel. If you're getting into bladesmithing, a lot of people will tell you you can't use unknown steel. Do not use unknown steel. Don't make knives out of files. Don't make knives out of leaf springs. And I'm here to tell you that you can make a fairly decent knife, and I'm going to do a demonstration very soon with a knife, in this video, with a knife that I made from a file, and you can see how good they are. But old files, a lot of the time people throw out files before they pass their use-by date. And with a little bit of file carding and a little bit of work, you can get these to work really well. And these two that I actually use in my workshop to file things. These aren't things that I'm going to make into knives. So keep an eye out for good old school files. I think I picked these up for $1 a piece at a garage sale. And then on top of that, if you live anywhere near rural facilities, like anywhere near horse people, you'll hear about farriers quite a bit. And farriers use farrier's rasps, and the knife I'm going to use in the demonstration, it was made out of a farrier's rasp. What is a farrier's rasp? It is basically almost a wood rasp on one side and a coarse file on the other. And these are also made out of decent steel, but they're also really useful for moving material. So if you find a farrier who has a not quite worn out farrier's rasp, you might be able to pull it off get it off him, because you'll be able to remove a lot of material with the coarse file on steel, and with the farrier's rasp side, you'll be able to shape your handles, which is really useful. Wood rasps are also another good thing to invest in if you're getting into wooden handles, making axes, making knives, swords, anything like that where you're going to be having to move wood. Getting a wood rasp is also really useful if you can't get a powered grinder. But getting to the king of stock, the starting stock that most of us blacksmiths started with when we got into the hobby or the trade, is rebar, or Rio, or reinforcement bar, or whatever you want to call it. But concrete reinforcing bar is one of the staples of the blacksmithing community. Every shop I've ever been to, every shop I've seen on YouTube, every shop in the world, I'm pretty sure, has a piece of rebar lying around somewhere. I use this stuff. You've seen me use it to make my bottle openers. You've seen me use it to make arrowheads. You've also seen me use it to make handles for the bigger stock that I use. For instance, this hammerhead that I'm forging is welded onto a piece of rebar that I can hold in tongs. So it has a lot of different uses, and it's plentiful. It's everywhere. You go to a construction site, they've got offcuts lying around. This stuff I actually got off a rebar manufacturer who had a whole bunch of it sitting in a skip bin, and he just said, oh yeah, go for it. And it's also relatively inexpensive if you go to a steel distributor to buy this stuff anyway. It's like $3 a linear meter or something like that, even cheaper than that. I think it's maybe $1.50 for a linear meter. But if you want to use known steel, go to a steel supplier, and you can buy 1/2 inch or 3/8 of an inch or 12 or 10 mil square stock, which is really useful for making all kinds of wrought iron work. Obviously it's not good for knives, and nor is the rebar, but when you're getting started, you don't really want to get started in knives. You want to get started in hammering material or working out how to forge stuff. And the best way to do that is to start with these small materials and long, which means that you don't have to use tongs, which is really useful, to make a decent set of, whatever you want to make. The other advantage of these materials is that you can go online and find quite a few videos of people making usable tong sets out of these materials, out of the 10 mil square stock and the rebar. Actually, one of my viewers, Techronmatic, has a channel where he recently just made a very simple set of bolt tongs, basically, for out of 10 mil square stock, which is more than serviceable, and that should be one of the projects that you should start on, is trying to make your own set of tongs so you don't have to stick your hand in the fire to get your work out. But yeah, the advantage of not having to use tongs with these materials is really useful. So yeah, and that's it. That's all you need. There are a lot of people that get into blacksmithing and they hear a lot of stories about all of the different tools that you need, power hammers and hydraulic presses and $2,000 grinders and gas forges. It's not true. You can start with this little material. Now what we're going to do is step outside, and I'm going to show you my first forge and how simple that is to build. So we're going to start with the top of the forge, and this is the pot, the fire pot. Now, as you can see, it's not that deep. It's only, thumb's depth, which is about 3 inches or so, 2.5 inches. And it's got a hole in the bottom of a steel plate. And you can actually see the pipe that runs through the bottom. That's where the air used to come through. Now, these drill holes were too small, and I ended up punching a hole through it to make a larger hole, because the charcoal doesn't normally get small enough that it'll fall through there anyway. And this is just light refractory cement that I bought from my local hardware store to line the walls. And this is a big enough fire pot to do a lot of things. Now, if we move down, you can see that there is a cross piece. Now, this cross piece is where the air flows through. This side piece here, that tape is actually where I used to tape a hairdryer to blow my air. And that's all I used, is a hairdryer. And I still use a hairdryer for my channel forge. And this area here is the ash dump. And that's would open to dump the ash that would fall down the air pipe, so that the air pipe wouldn't end up getting blocked with ash. Now, this is a relatively complex design of forge, but it was the starting forge that I had. I had my dad help me build it. And as you can see, it was built into a rolling table that we had lying around the shop. But your forge doesn't have to be this complicated. I'm going to show you my more simple design now. This is the more simply designed forge for the beginner. It is literally just 3 pieces of 3 mil mild steel welded in a U shape, about 14 inches long, with refractory cement running down the sides. And that's to protect the steel from melting. And then, running through it, if you can see here, is the air hole, which runs through to a pipe to the hairdryer. So that is the whole forge, is just a U-shaped piece of material with a pipe that goes to a hairdryer. Now, in front of the hairdryer is this little piece of sheet steel and a hole cut in the bottom of the pipe. And if I push this down, it closes off the air. If I open it up, the air flows faster. So I don't have to control the speed through the hairdryer so much as I can with just altering the speed of the air through the valve. And that way I'm not overloading the hairdryer either, because the air is just diverted out of the hole rather than being blocked completely and putting weight on the motor. But that is as simple as it gets. And if you sit that on a sheet of metal, then you're fine. So next I'm going to show you what you can do with a file knife. So here I have a file knife. This was made out of a farrier's rasp when I was in Queensland, with only hand tools. I didn't use any power tools to make this knife, because when I was out in Banana, in the middle of Queensland, we didn't really have that many power tools. So this was made with all hand tools, out of a farrier's rasp, and over a space of a couple of days while I was on holiday. But as you can see, it's pretty rough. I call it the mongrel. It's a mongrel of a blade. But I just freshly sharpened it. It is quite sharp. Oops. Ooh, getting a bit of ripping. But it is suitably sharp. Just got to get the angle right. And this here is a Manky 2x4 that I pulled out of my backyard. I'm going to chop this in half, and you can see what this is capable of. So there you go. Not too bad in speed wise. And there's a bit of sap on the blade, but if I grab myself another piece of paper, that sap is really impeding. There we go. So satisfying. But yes, that is a farrier's rasp knife, heat treated in a charcoal forge, made using only hand tools, that can still chop a 2x4 in half and still shave paper, and I'm pretty sure that can still shave my arm. So don't let people tell you that you can't make something good out of something unknown. That's the main point of this. So with all that being said, it isn't to say that unknown steels are better than known steels. Obviously with a known steel you can control your heat treats, you can have very, very specific graphs for the hardness versus toughness and all that kind of stuff. You're never going to get as reliable a result out of unknown steels. But when you're getting into blacksmithing, you can't let those people who will tell you all of these, oh, you have to use 1084, you have to use 1095, you have to use 5160, you have to use any of those, let you get in the way of making something that is usable, looks good, and works. And one of the best ways that you can be sure of how good your work is to test it. Like this knife has gone through many 2x4s. This isn't the first time I've done this. I knew what the result was going to be because I test all of my knives. So even the knives that I do make out of rasps, like my my File Fighter line and all of those knives, they're all tested. They're all tested hard, they're beaten up, because I want to know when I hand them over to a customer, they're going to get something that works. So, with that being said, get out there, don't make excuses. With very, very little materials, you can get started in blacksmithing tomorrow. I, even now, with all of the tooling that I have around me, still use the tools that I showed you today in daily use. All of these tools that I've showed you today are my tools, and they are used by me on the daily. So get out there, guys, make something beautiful, and I will see you in the next video. Cheers. Thank you for watching, and don't forget to hit that like button, and if you want to see more from me, don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification icon to be notified when I next upload. I'd like to thank my patrons, Kine, Nathan, and Andy, for their support. Without you guys, I couldn't keep doing this series or these videos. Thank you so much. And as always, guys, see you in the next video. Have a good one.